Hey everybody. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the things that Top Gun Maverick kind of messes up on a little with the F-14 scene. So to start off, what they do is they try to take off with the F-14. They try to take off on a taxiway that is not as long as a runway, and Rooster acts like this is going to be a problem. Now, in reality, it's not that much of a problem. The F-14 has fairly powerful engines. Combined with the flaps and the wings fully extended, it actually has a good bit of lift. So the takeoff run on the F-14 is probably shorter than you think it is if you really need to push it, right? Like, that was an incredibly fast takeoff for an aircraft of this size and weight. The bigger issue, if you're looking at that scene, really comes down to the foreign object debris. Like, the runway was completely cratered. So you're going to have a lot of, debris and stuff like that just kicking around the runway, and that's not very healthy for the aircraft. Like, you could easily suck it into either of these giant intakes and destroy one or both of the engines, and if you're trying to take off and you get up to speed and one of your engines goes out, you're probably going to hit something. The other problem is they go off the runway and they almost immediately pull up, and then the wings start folding right away. Now you notice our wings are not folding right away. The wings don't really start to fold until you hit a fairly good speed, and the objective of the wings, like pivoting in, is to allow for performance at high speeds, but also to keep them from ripping off if you're going at high speeds. So now they're starting to pivot in at around 500 kilometers an hour. They would not have been anywhere near this speed. And when you get close to supersonic, that's when they're going to be all the way in, and this is where you kind of have to address the whole wing sweep thing in general about Maverick. Is like the wings go all the way in at around supersonic speeds, but a lot of the dogfighting, they're not at supersonic speeds, and the wings are basically all the way in anyway. So that is one of the issues. Like, the wing sweep kind of just seems to adjust from scene to scene based on, and also if they were going supersonic speeds, you would see a mock cloud, and you also see these little fins in the front of the airframe. And as we slow down, they retract. So yeah, like, I don't recall seeing the fins at all in the front of the aircraft. There wasn't really a mock cloud at any point, and a lot of the maneuvers they're doing, there's no way they would have been able to maintain a supersonic speed while doing it unless they started the maneuver going incredibly fast. So, as far as the wing sweep in Top Gun Maverick, you should probably just assume it's kind of a rule of cool thing, like, the wings will stay in or go out as needed for the scene to look good, and not necessarily because it makes sense based on the relative speed of the aircraft. Like, the wings sweeping in doesn't help it go faster, it just helps it not rip the wings as it's going faster. And the wings extending out are just to give it more lift so it can, stay in the air at lower speeds, have better takeoff and landing. The other thing we're going to kind of address, it uses the same gun firing sound for both the F-14 Tomcat and the Su-57. They actually have pretty different guns. And while the firing sound is like close enough for the Sioux, it is not very close to the Tomcat, because this is closer to what it sounds like. The Tomcat does in fact have a Gatling gun. It will burn through its ammo incredibly fast, which raises another issue with the dogfight, is both of them seem to have a lot more trigger time than these aircraft realistically have. Like there, we're out of ammo. Like, the amount of ammo they seem to have in the dogfight does seem a little excessive, but not too crazy. The other issue is when you go to do an IR lock, Maverick pulls up his missile, he's trying to get a lock. The missiles are definitely Sidewinders, because this is the only missiles that are shown on the aircraft. Now, how exactly Maverick went about getting those missiles on the aircraft is a fantastic question, because you probably wouldn't just leave missiles on it. Maybe it was an alert fighter for emergencies, whatever. But they probably wouldn't leave it loaded, like, with the ammunition and missiles, and it's probably not a job that he and Rooster can do by themselves. So it is one of those where it's like, how exactly they got the missiles on the aircraft and got the guns working, that's a pretty valid question that one would be entirely within the right realm of reason to ask. But in terms of the missile, Maverick's looking for tone. Sidewinders don't make like a beeping noise. They have a growling noise when they find a signature. This game doesn't even really represent it correctly, but you can certainly look up growling Sidewinder and hear the noise if you want. If you listen to any like audios of dogfights, you'll hear that sound a lot. It's fairly common. And It's fairly distinct too, which is why it's kind of weird that they didn't really put that in the movie. Another feature Maverick does that I can't really replicate here is he does split throttle, where he kills one engine in order to essentially get his speed and roll around faster. What that would actually do is that would cause a flat spin. Like, because you like asymmetric thrust would not cause you to turn or roll faster. It would just cause your plane to uncontrollably spin. And the F-14 is entirely reliant on the control surfaces and wind moving over them in a specific fashion in order to generate like the ability to move and maneuver. So the F-14 wouldn't really be able to recover from that. Well, it wouldn't be able to recover easily. A good enough pilot could recover, but not enough time to get a shot on an opponent while doing it. So that is one of the issues, is like the split throttle maneuver probably doesn't work. The hit the brakes maneuver actually does work reasonably well, because it turns out the F-14 is a Delta. The F-14 can actually lose its speed incredibly fast, especially with the air brakes. So you could drop a few hundred kilometers an hour pretty quickly and get behind somebody with a well-timed, like, barrel roll plus air brake. So that's actually a pretty reasonable maneuver. We see it in the first Top Gun as well. You also notice, I'm not sure if this is intentional or if it's just like an editing thing, but when Maverick goes to dodge the missile, he pulls up, drops flares, and also is an afterburner, right? Obviously, if it's an infrared missile, it's going to follow the flares. Or it's going to follow the best heat source. And if you cut your afterburners, or you cut thrust, probably not cut entirely, but if you just cut afterburners, you'll significantly reduce your heat signature. So that actually was reasonably accurate. And Maverick waits for the smoke, which is Rio Rooster calls out, in order to put the enemy plane between him and the missile, allowing it to shoot down one of the other planes that is already injured. Now, the other plane that's already injured is probably suffered enough damage that they're having to use afterburners just to stay in the air at that point. So it's actually pretty reasonable that they would have a stronger heat signature than Maverick would, especially if Maverick crossed paths. Like, heat seekers do tend to follow the strongest heat signature. If you were to cross them, that would definitely happen. It would certainly go after a better heat signature. The Su-57, when it's dodging the missile, actually turns its plane completely flat, which is reasonable, right? Like, the missile has the best view of the heat source when you're directly behind it. If he goes flat and cuts throttle, like, the missile would actually lose that heat signature, or might lose it enough to where it can't find a good track. It might get fooled by other things like the sun. One thing about Top Gun Maverick that they get completely wrong is Maverick's like, let's get low and let's go in this terrain. That'll confuse his targeting. Dude, you are a massive heat signature. You are a massive radar signature. You are directly in front of him. None of his targeting will care about that. Like unless the Su-57 has much worse radar and or IRST than I have been led to believe, there is no way it would care about terrain at that distance. It would see you perfectly fine. It wouldn't really do anything. Oh, ripped a wing. So, like, if you wanted to confuse targeting, you would either have to get a much longer distance or put much more substantial terrain between you and the target. Just, you know, going through some hills and having them follow you wouldn't really be enough for, like, the Su-57's radar or IRST systems to care. And last but not least, one of the details is, like, when both Maverick and the Su-57 flare missiles, what you notice happen very quickly is the missile hits the flare and explode. Missiles don't explode when they hit flares. Like, missiles have a proximity fuse. You need something big and solid like an aircraft to set it off. They won't explode when they go through flares. They just get decoyed, and they might self-destruct if they don't see a target. But generally speaking, the missiles won't explode just because they hit flares. At the bare minimum, they will continue going for a short distance before they do eventually self-destruct. And one of the last little details, at the very end, when Maverick encounters basically the last Su-57, he gets that signal you just heard, probably, the RWR. That's a radar warning signal that lets you know somebody's locking you. And it makes sense because the Su-57 is at a distance and directly in front of him. So you would get a radar lock there. except they actually flare the missile being fired, which indicates that it's an infrared missile, which you wouldn't assume it's an infrared missile. Like, I'm not sure why you would assume it's an infrared missile if your opponent's getting a lock and it's a frontal aspect shot. That would probably be a radar-guided missile, which flares wouldn't do anything for. And also, pulling up would just give it a better signature. So that wouldn't be the best possible course of action. Like, ideally with a radar-guided missile, you would try to wait until you saw it go pitbull and try to turn in a direction where it can't reasonably follow, but, yeah. So that didn't really make any sense to me. At the very end, Maverick is at low level. He's trying to avoid the Sioux. And what ends up happening is Maverick tells Rooster to eject. Rooster can't eject, so they try to pull up to eject. Now, you don't, strictly speaking, have to do this. Most modern planes have ejection systems that will work, like, literally if you are on the ground. Like, so you wouldn't need to, but being on the ground or very close to the ground doesn't give you a lot of room for error if there's any kind of malfunction that has to be fixed. So ideally you would want to put some altitude between you and the ground before you hit the eject. The other minor thing that felt a little weird is Maverick is pulling up, the Sioux is coming after him, looks like he's about to get hit, and then Hangman takes out the Sioux. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because whatever Hangman is shooting at the Sioux will definitely get a warning. It will get a missile warning, a radar warning. If it's an AMRAAM, it will get something. It will get some notification that somebody is trying to shoot a missile at him. And obviously it is not the F-14 in front of him doing it. So the Sioux knows he has company, but just for some reason commits to Maverick. Like, I'm not really sure why that would ever happen unless this, I don't know, maybe one of the guys Maverick already shot down was one of the Sioux's best friends, and he, like, wanted to get revenge or something. But, that just seems like an odd course for me, because the Sioux would definitely know he is being attacked by somebody else. He knows he has another contact. So unless he's just trying to quickly get ahead of the F-14, get rid of the F-14, but, like, why? The F-14 can't really hurt him. Oh yeah, one other small detail before we wrap up. When Maverick does the maneuver where he air brakes and pulls up, he then noses down. Nosing down is negative G's. Now, you probably noticed from that, we lost control at about 3 negative G's, but we pulled 11 negative G's up with no issues. Negative G's are a lot harder to pull than positive G's. Like, pointing the nose down is way worse for the human body than pointing the nose up. So what you would probably do in that scenario, unless something weird is happening, is you would pull, you would hit the brakes, you would pull up, and then you would roll and pull back down into them, because the human body can just take a lot more G's doing that, pulling into a target, like pulling up into a target, rather than trying to nose down on them. So that's kind of a weird one. Like, I'm not really sure why you would just pull negative G's there, because negative G's are very harsh on the human body. Like 3 or 4 G's, we start experiencing problems, but we can go up to like 11 or 10 for short periods without even caring. So you probably see, like, right there, like, it's not a perfect representation, but it does accurately show that negative G's are really bad. So that just seems like an odd pick, unless it was just like a shooting thing where they're like, we need to pull up, we need to have you pull up and then nose back down. But you could just, do that and you get the same effect. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice day, everybody.